to Accelerate Your Wealth, a podcast by Rebecca Robertson, founder and director of Evolution Financial Planning. We hope you enjoy the show, and please feel free to leave us a review. It really does help. Feel free to connect with us on Facebook, LinkedIn and Instagram, or head over to www.rebeccarobertson.co.uk or our sponsor, Evolution Financial Planning, for regulated advice on www.evolutionfinancialplanning.co.uk/podcast.
And welcome back to today's show. I have my lovely Jennie. I say my, I don't, but this doesn't belong to me. Jennie Delilis. If you've not listened to one of our previous shows with Jennie, Jennie's worked with me for 8 years.
8-9 years, yeah.
It's crazy.
Long time.
In our regulated company, Evolution Financial Planning, which I've run for 12 years. Jennie is our mortgage protection and will writer. So wills are not regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. There isn't actually a regulation around them.
No, there isn't. They were talking about bringing one in, but I'm not too sure. Obviously, it is regulated in its own way. If you are part of a network that obviously makes sure that you do your CPDs and you've got a membership like the Society of Will Writers, which I belong to.
Yeah. But there's no one check. I mean, do they check any of your like cases and stuff? Like
you can ask them. Obviously, if you've got a case, you can share it with them, and you can have a conversation about what you feel would be best in this scenario. So if you think of something, and for example, you just want to make sure, you can always contact them and ask.
So do you know the difference between? I'm gonna put you on the spot here. Do you know the difference between a will writer and a solicitor that's writing a will?
So there's no difference. The only difference is the solicitor might have a more in-depth knowledge about trust, for example, which, although I can do a will trust, I wouldn't be able to do a trust outside of a will, and the independent trust. So the solicitor is more broadened in that area, in the sense of they would do more around assets and everything else. Well, I am a will writer. Yes, I will do your will. Yes, I can do a will trust, but I wouldn't do specifically anything else involved with that.
Outside of that, yeah. And that's normally because the trust, it's not actually anything to do with the will in some respects. They are sort of two separate things. They almost like refer to the will in essence.
Depending on the trust, there is will trust, so you can protect your property with a will trust. You can create a will trust for beneficiaries, but any other trust, obviously, which is outside of a will, that would be a different.
That would be and they normally open it with like a tenner. They put £10 in it, and it sort of becomes like an active will now. A trust account now that's associated with the will, and then therefore that's not what a normal will writer would do. And we're getting to trust in just a second, but what I will highlight for people is not every solicitor is the same. So you might go and see a solicitor who does a little bit of probate work. So that's correct, the work that's done once someone's passed away. There might be an executor, for example, and they might write wills. But it doesn't mean that they are or have a lot of experience in certain kinds of trusts, or they might prefer a certain way of doing trusts. So trust, I wasn't thinking we was going to get into this conversation so quickly, but we have. But what trust work can do for somebody certainly with a large estate, or there's lots of different reasons why someone might want an estate trust work. And you have to be very careful, don't you, Jen? Because there's obviously, when it comes to care fees, you can be classed by the local council of deprivation of assets, where you've intentionally basically moved your money into trust to avoid paying care home fees. So you have to be quite careful that. And the same thing, I'll share what happened with my mum. So my mum, bear in mind, I've worked in financial services 23 years. My mum messaged me saying, spoken to a solicitor, I've set you up as an executor, is that all right? We've had a will written up and we're doing some trust thing. I'm like, oh my God. Oh no. Okay.
Oh yeah, I remember.
What are they recommending? I want to see the trust paperwork. Like, I need to know what is going on here.
Yeah, we've looked at that, didn't we?
Yeah, I think did I send you a copy?
Yeah, I've seen it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I looked at it and I read it, and it's like you sort of get a bit of it, but they're not the easiest thing to read, to understand. It's very legal jargon. And it's very oldie weldy, isn't it, Jen? Like the way things are put.
They are written down, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I had one client, I don't know if you've had this, Jen. I had one client one year, they looked at their will and I was like, can you put it in normal speaking English for
I've
me?
had that before, yes. So there's so many words you can change within a will to make it, I mean, yeah, it's a
I
difficult
thus
one.
give my assets to their on the second, third of da 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 da. It's just
issues, yeah.
Very weird language. So you kindly had someone look over it for me, which was great, really helpful. But this company, I did a bit of due diligence, and the guy that ran it had a bit of a background, shall we say. The company looked legit, and what they recommended didn't seem terrible. And I gave my mum some really honest feedback about it all. But I said, it's your decision what you want to do. These are the pros and cons. And basically, it would be tying up money into a trust. I forget which type it was now. And it meant that basically, it sounds really bad. My mum passed away. The money would go into this trust. And if I split up from my husband, that couldn't be included as part of the divorce. And this is not for everyone, by the way. It's just that this is how some trusts can work.
Yeah.
And so no advice given here. And it would mean that if I went bankrupt, which hopefully will never happen, like that money's protected. So there's benefits for that. It means that it was an outside of the property would be included. So I think it was a property trust, but it was outside of the will. I think that's what it was. And it meant that basically on the second of her or a partner, the second death, the house would be sold and the trust would own the money that was in it. But if I didn't spend that money that was in there for me, it would mean that my children would get it and there'd be no inheritance tax to pay. I don't believe that you can avoid inheritance tax on the first issue when the property's first sold. I don't know if you know that, Jen.
Yeah, I'm not. It depends really on how everything is set up, because you've got to remember you've got you might have potential tax relief, you might have the 7-year rule. Yeah, it's a very complicated subject, and depending on the case, obviously, you just got to make sure it's set up properly.
Yeah, I think in the property essence, where the sale is made after death, is a little bit questionable. I'd need an expert to talk about that. But when it comes to, like, if you were setting up a trust and you put assets in it in the first instance, it was like, like say 100 grand into a trust, then they often, depends on the type of trust, but
because they've got their own sets of rules, haven't they, depending on the trust. Yes.
And then that will mean that they don't actually form part of your estate in the first place, because it was set up prior. So coming back to solicitors, so trust work can be quite complicated, and every solicitor can do things differently. So you might have one solicitor who do it one way, and then the firm that my mum went to, they were a bit more specialist in doing 2 or 3 kinds of trust work. And I'd not seen it done that way before. When I used to do wills and trust work years ago, we referred it over to this particular company, and they did it another way. So I think it's a really complex area that you've got to be really careful. But it can be, though, especially those that are really want their assets to be passing on from a legacy perspective, it's definitely worth pursuing. But they're normally, you're talking thousands of pounds to set them up.
They are quite expensive, set up, depending obviously on what you need it to do, really, I suppose.
So the main purpose of today's podcast was to talk about wills, but trusts do link into that, and the difference between a will writer and a solicitor. So what we've just spoken about is also with a solicitor, they might do, like, so Jennie and a will writer could do just as good a job as a solicitor when it comes to writing a basic everyday kind of will, right? And the only difference is that I think solicitors have a higher liability insurance because of the way that their their businesses are run because they're a legal entity.
Yeah, because they do more, like you just said, they do extra work, like maybe potential with trust outside wills, they do probate, they do administration. So all that comes into consideration. Where I don't do the administration or probate, but I do use a specialist company who will do it for me if needed.
If needed, yeah. Now, the worrying thing about a will writer is that Jennie's actually got two hats. So one is this will writer hat, and one is a regulated hat. She's taken financial qualifications, but actually, I mean, in terms of, you know, if there was an issue or something, they are two very different processes, and the FCA are very touchy about this kind of thing, and so are our networks, because they don't want anyone to make a complaint about a will and then the client think that then falls under the FCA regulation. So they want to keep it very separate, which
That's
is why
we have a PI insurance.
It's completely separate, yeah. And if the company hasn't got that PI insurance, then they just almost want to avoid it. But writing a will is so crucial and so important, and it should be part of the financial conversation. But that is basically why it's not brought up enough, it's not discussed enough, and they become almost like a separate financial planning element. But actually, someone could be a builder, and I'm not saying there's anything wrong with a builder or a scaffolder, or, you know, whatever, work in a bank, like whatever they do, and they could literally set themselves up as a will writer with technically no qualifications. They would need to get software and have a bit of training, but how good that training is, you know, there's no regulation around it. But companies like the Society of Will Writers, who have a very good reputation, actually you have to apply, and you have to have a sort of like a CV, don't you, Jen, like an application process, and be approved.
Yeah, every year we have CPDs. We've obviously got get a membership, and we've got lots of documents to fill out to make sure we are still capable of writing wills. We've got exams monthly. Yeah, it's quite stringent. It's not,
good.
You know, me saying I'm a will writer and then off you go. Yeah, it's quite a long process.
Slightly worrying though. I mean, I'm not saying I've seen it done, but I do think that it's case by case. It's a complicated area. It's quite simple in some respects, but for some people it can become quite complicated. So that's the difference between the solicitors and will writers. We talked a little bit about trust, but in a basic will writer sense, Jen, let's talk about some of the main reasons why people should write a will. So do you want to come up with one first?
So people need to write a will first to make sure their assets and wishes are executed how they want them to be, and obviously everything to go to the people they want it to go to. Funeral wishes, because sometimes we don't think about it. When I speak to clients, they're like, oh, I didn't think about that. So this is another conversation. So, you know, it can be anything. Like I always say, you tell me what you want in your own words, and then I'll put it into the document to make it legal for you. Guardianship is another one. What else? It's weird when you do something day in, day out, you don't think about it because it's automatic. But when you go talk about it,
well, let's step back a minute. Let's talk about guardianship for a second, and then we'll come on to funeral wishes, because I think there's so much within just those two conversations. So guardianship, why do they need it for guardianship?
Okay, so if someone's got children who are under 18, they need a guardian, because if anything was to happen to them, who would look after the children? The court would eventually decide. So it's very important to write it down in the will who you would want your children to go to. Normally, when I have this conversation, I said to client, right, it needs to be somebody the children knows, because ideally, sometimes it can't happen, but ideally, it needs to be somebody that will be able to look after them from whatever age to up to the age, you know, sometimes they might go to university, etc., etc. So just to ensure that they look after, it's primordial to have a guardian within the will, somebody that will be there to look after your children if anything happens to you.
So let's talk about parental responsibility for a second. And we've got a normal heterosexual couple, male, female kind of setup. And they're not married. They've had children, and he's on the birth certificate, but they've separated. They've really fallen out. He only sees the kids maybe once a month, or she sees the kids only maybe once a month. And one of them wants to write a will. What will it mean in terms of legally to that family if one of them was to pass away?
Okay, so how about a case like that? So basically, legally, both parents have to have their children. So if something was to happen to one parent, automatically the child would go to the second parent. If the second parent is nowhere to be seen or doesn't want responsibility, it's advisable to add a guardian. And then hopefully, the children will go with that guardian who the parents who made the will chose, especially if they haven't got no contact. But legally, obviously, mother and father have got priority on anyone else. So,
Yeah.
Nobody knows. But as long as you write a letter of wishes with it as well, explaining why, then
Yeah.
if it goes to court, you've done your best, and you would hope that your children would be going with that guardian, regardless of whether the parent was able to look after them.
But I mean, unless that individual, if that person wanted that child, unless they're in a situation where, let's just say they're a registered, drug addict, for example, unless there was something clear cut like that, then they're not. And even in that example, that's not always a clear cut situation. They're likely to go to that other parent, right?
They would, yeah. Unless, as I said, it goes to court and the guardian fights it out, and there is a letter of wishes explaining the reasons why. Obviously, it doesn't have to apply, but it's worth a go.
That guardian would need to contest that and legally challenge that and pay for that legal process, right?
Yeah.
And it's only so really then it's when both parents was to pass away at the same time or retrospectively that would kick in, the guardianship would kick in.
Yeah.
So it's really quite a scary situation for both parents to pass. That would be really unfortunate.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just talk about funeral wishes. I find a lot of people, I don't know if you found this, they're like, oh, they can just do whatever they want, I'll be dead, I won't care. And I think they're missing the point, don't you?
Yeah, well, they say that in the first instance, but once we have that conversation and they go back and think about it, sometimes I do get long paragraphs of how they want, I've had some very interesting requests. I mean, it's nice, people were saying,
what's the worst or the funniest or the most peculiar?
Oh, I've had one, they wanted to be cremated except the heart. They wanted to be in a box, keep the heart all together if everybody was to be passing away together in a box with picture. It's that's what they want, that's what we put down.
Each their own.
Yeah, it will depend if the executors, obviously it's a job of the executors and trustee to make it happen. So as long we write down, ideally you put I wish, but it doesn't have to be done legally. But I think
you can't come back and see the person when you're dead, right?
Yeah.
But most executors would do the job. Most executors, unless it's challenged by somebody, because most people have their executors as their family members, right? They don't always have a professional executor. No. I had a couple where a couple of professional executors were appointed because they didn't trust about anyone else, or they didn't have anybody else. And then you're having fees. So obviously that comes from the estate. But if you have a trusted family member that you would trust them, happy to do it. And obviously young enough, that's the other thing. You don't want someone that's, always exactly the same age, because then by the time they're potentially having to do the work, they might be too old to want to do it. Or
you have to be mindful. I always mention, if you can help it, do not put your parents, because obviously the likelihood of them being able to be executors and trustee later on down in life, it's looking unlikely. So
it's hoping the longer time. But I think the point that people are missing when it comes to funeral plans is that it gives the executors, and especially the family, such wonderful guidance, because I see so much arguing. Oh no, she didn't want that, and no, she wants it like this, and like they can create such an opportunity for the family to come together and mourn together. I see so many families broken up through arguing over money, my own family included, on both sides of my partner and myself, in the last 2 or 3 recent deaths, and it's heartbreaking.
It is, yeah. The more guidance you can provide, the better. Definitely. That's why, when I tell them, ideally do make a letter of wishes. It doesn't have to be anything too complicated, but just to provide guidance for those executors and trustees to say, right, this is what I want. And then it's on paper, it's signed and dated, and nobody can contest to say, right, this is not what they wanted in the end. So
yeah, I mean, they're going to argue. There are some that are just going to argue the point anyway, because that does happen. and well, I'm going to do it this way, and then you would have to literally almost sue the person and take them through the court process. So it is a tricky. I do find that sort of after legal process is rather grey, and it depends on how the case is put together, how it's presented, who's representing who, what, why, and when.
Yeah, it's a shame, really, isn't it? I mean, you'd think, here's the will, here's the wishes, just what's the problem? But yeah, it's just the way.
Yeah, a lot of family arguments, even in normal situations, let alone more complicated ones, as I've recently found. So the other thing you mentioned was asset allocation of assets. Now, one thing I don't think people realise, that if they're a married couple, doesn't mean you're going to get all the money. So even if you're married, if you're not married, then if you have a property together and you both own it together, then that's a joint asset. But otherwise, if you're not married, basically everything in, say, Mr's name or Mrs. name, Miss name, Ms. name, whichever you're referring to or connotation you want to use, it's theirs. It's their asset, right? There's no joint element when you're not married. That's why I see a lot of older couples have been together like 30 years and they end up getting married just for this reason. And it helps with inheritance tax because it means you've got a joint inheritance
increases
tax. What was I saying? So yes, when you're married, then all assets then go to the other person, but that's actually not strictly true, right, Jem?
No, so you've got if your estate is worth less than 270,000, then yes, it will all go to your wife. If it's worth more and you've got children, potentially the wife or the husband gets 270 and the rest is divided among the children. So it's very important to have that within your will to say, right, my husband or my wife or my partner gets everything, so to avoid any issues.
You could be talking like a family home that's sold to basically pay off children.
Yeah.
Or it's like the other one going, oh, can I stay in the house that I've paid for the last 50 years and you can have it when I die? Is that okay?
Yeah,
because you haven't wrote a will.
That can happen. Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's very important to have your will written. At least it's clear and concise. Your wishes are there. It's all written down. And, I mean, the clients don't have to worry. Like I said to you earlier, they tell me what they want and I write it down in terms that are clear and legal,
Yeah, love it. So we've covered sort of 3. What else? Let's have 2 more. What else would you want to write a will for? So we talked about
distributions. So you can, that way you can write down within your will who you'd like the people to inherit. So obviously, if you have children with different partner, but you still want them to inherit, you need to write them down within your will. If you want all your children to inherit equally, you would need to put that down within your will. So it's just easier, isn't it? Okay,
maybe it's certain items, right? So if you might have a painting or a piece of jewellery or something like that.
Yeah, you can bequest money or gifts to people you love as well. Yeah, we can write that within a will. Even animals.
Some clients, not to get it too complicated though, there was one client who had like a spreadsheet, a list of everything, and had like an allocation. I was like, no, this is like, what happens if you lost that piece of art? What happens if you that became worth less than what you think now? What if that went missing or it was sold or broken?
Sold. Yeah, of course.
Sometimes it can get a little bit too complicated. You want to make it longevity of the will so it's robust.
You usually be more like a piece of jewelry, sort of ring, watch collection, stamp collection. Not many people collect stamps these days, but I still use that. I don't know why. So yeah, it would have to be something specific. However, what I normally add within my will pack is a memorandum of wishes, where people at home, if they think, okay, I've got this, I don't know, it can be anything. I've got this really nice bracelet I got last Christmas. Oh, let's write it down on my memorandum of wishes and write it down to who I would like it to go to. So with the copy of the will, they can have that. And obviously, if anything happened, this can be pulled out with all the rest of the documents. Say, oh, yeah, so-and-so wanted, this bracelet, we can give it to them. So, but yeah, ideally, you want something within your will as a gift that has longevity, something you've had for a long time and you wish your beneficiaries to get.
You mentioned gifting at the beginning around trust work and inheritance tax and the 7-year rule. Do you want to just explain what the 7-year rule is, Jen?
So basically, when you're alive, you can make gifts, certain amounts of gifts without having being taxed on it. If your gift is above a certain allowance, you will get taxed on it unless you survive for 7 years. So every year you survive, the tax gets less and less. So you got to make sure. So if you give a £10,000 to your children, for example, you want to make sure that you'll be alive for 10 years so that your children don't get taxed on it.
Right. Thanks for clarifying. And I think we've gotten 4 so far. Have you got one more for us? Reasons to write a will?
Exclusions.
Yeah.
So you got to be very mindful, because some people, like you said earlier about going to court, could contest your will. So if you've got anybody, for example, if you've got a husband you're not divorced from, and you do a will and you don't include him, potentially could go to court and say, well, that was my wife or my husband and I want to contest it. So you need to put it down within your will to say this person is not to get anything. It doesn't have to be your husband, it can be a family member, it can be your parents, for example, because obviously if you follow the rules, if you've got no one else, your parents could potentially inherit. So you need to write down, well, I don't want my family, my parents or whoever, sister or brother to inherit as well. So we can add that to the will.
Yeah. Marvelous. Anything we've not mentioned that we think is really important? There's probably lots, but anything else?
Animals.
Yeah, we've got to talk about animals.
You can add animals within your wills. So if you've got animal and you obviously don't want it to be left out, or you can write it down like within your will who you'd like him or her to go to. So yeah, it's quite good. I like that.
And then I guess we should mention charities, right? So you can gift in your will to charities, and you can be a charity, for example. What benefit does that have?
Reduce your IHT. So anything above 325 for single or 650 for couples is taxed at 40%. If you give to charity, it's taxed at 36%. So if you give at least 10% to charity, it reduces your tax bill, basically.
Perfect. Well, thanks for joining me today to talk about wills and all that planning stuff. Death and taxes are 2 things we know of, right? And I think doing this job, we talk about death quite a lot. And I think we're going to record another show right now about insurances, but I think I'm going to do it separately. And so when we talk about life insurance, between us, Jen, we talk about death and taxes. That's basically our job, isn't it?
Yeah.
Actually, it's not as what's the word? It's actually empowering for people. I think it's not always sad. It's actually quite a positive thing to do.
No, you're protecting, the people around you at the end of the day. That's what it's all about, isn't it? That's what will does, and that's what protection does as well, Well, yourself as well with protection, obviously, because you can get critical illness, but that's for another day.
We're going to record that separately. So thank you for joining me today, Jen.
Thank you.
If you go to evolutionwillwriting.co.uk, that's www.evolutionwillwriting.co.uk. It's basically, you can contact, if you want to will, you can contact Jen through there. It's nothing to do with Evolution Financial Planning. I don't receive any, personally as a company or a limited company, I don't receive any commission, kickback, any referral fees, affiliates, nothing. That is purely Jen as a sole trader kind of setup where she can write wills for you. Can you do that online now since COVID?
There is companies that do it online, although I'm not too sure about them, because how can you make sure that exactly what you want will be written down? I mean, when I do will appointments, I do it face-to-face online, but I wouldn't just send you a form for you to fill out.
No.
Yeah, I don't know how I would feel about that. And on the compliance
you can do it on like a Zoom or a Teams.
That's what I do. I do face-to-face every time. So I don't have to live in the same town as you. I can always do it online. Yeah, that's not a problem.
Okay.
We are face-to-face.
I mean, I've had many happy clients that I've referred to Jen over the years. So yeah, I've never had an issue. I just personally don't do them anymore because I don't know. I just found them a little bit, didn't excite me anymore. After a few years, I wanted to do something different. And once you've been in financial services, is a big world, big subject, lots of things. So I just wanted to move on to something else. And do you like doing them, Jen? Do you enjoy them?
The best bit is talking to the people and like listening about what they want and stuff. Writing the will is a bit more complex because it takes quite a while to make sure that everything is written down as it should be. But yeah, so writing them down is not the best part. It's about talking to the people and having that conversation really about what they want to achieve.
Yeah, I know what you mean, definitely. And there's such peace of mind that you get. They just feel a weight has been lifted, so which is great, and that's all we can do. As when I was a will writer, and Jen is a will writer, me in a previous life, but you just take the instructions and do the best job that we can, and that's that's all we can do. Well, thanks for joining me today, Jen. If you want to listen to about our, I interviewed Jen previously about mortgages, as she's a mortgage broker. If you want to go and listen to that show, we talked about mortgage interest rates. It's been a few weeks, Jen. Is there any updates on that?
Oh, don't. It's been very testing this past few weeks. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. It's pulling rates again, right?
Yeah, they've gone up again. Lenders are pulling out rates, pulling back in. Yeah, if you do a mortgage, you've got to do it on the day. Obviously, it's not always easy as that, isn't it? So no notice as well. Lenders are just like, okay, we're putting out the rate in 2 hours. Oh my god.
Yeah. Well, anyone listening want a bit of advice on how to prepare, what to think about? I think the biggest tip that I think that was a really important one from that podcast was, if you've got a rate coming up in sort of within the next 6 months, so don't wait until 2 months before, then go and find out what your options are, because you might be able to secure a rate now that's better than what might be in 2 or 3, 4 months time. But go and listen to that show. It'd be listed below wherever you're listening to this, on Spotify or iTunes or on YouTube. And next up, I'm going to be talking to Jen about life insurance, critical illness, income protection, which I do as well, and I'm going to talk a little bit about business insurance as well, because we're a bit of a one-stop shop here. We've got quite a good broad knowledge of lots of different subjects. Thanks again for joining me today, Jen, and it's over from me.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us on today's episode of Accelerate Your Wealth. For further help or to connect with Rebecca directly, please head over to the website www.rebeccarobertson.co.uk, where you can find further information on our planner, book, and how to further maximise your wealth. Our sponsor, Evolution Financial Planning, for regulated advice on pensions, investments, mortgages, insurances on www.evolutionfinancialplanning.co.uk/podcast.